For those just joining, we're just past the official start time, but the join rate is still very high, so we're waiting a moment for people to get connected. All right, we're a couple of minutes in. The join rate is starting to slow down. I would like to remind everyone to share video if you can. Feel free to jump into the conversation at any point. We're not using a queuing mechanism there, unless we end up with a conversation that needs one, and then we'll explicitly put one in place. Remember that these sessions are recorded and the recordings will appear on YouTube. The link to the notes, which form the agenda for the meeting, is available in the chat. Does anyone have any agenda bashes before we start into the agenda as currently framed in those notes? All right. First, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to have these conversations. They are very useful to us in setting the direction that we're developing towards. I will start in with an update on the infrastructure transition progress. If you're not familiar with the diagram that is pinned just under the title for this section, please take a few minutes to skim and understand what that diagram is saying. We've moved quite a lot of infrastructure since the June meeting. The big applications, the data tracker, the www.ietf.org website, mail archive, the rsync service and the IMAP service were moved over. That happened on June 20th. We had scheduled a 4-hour outage. It took 2. We've had very few problems with those services after the transition. We do have much more visibility into how the individual services behave now that we don't have them conflated into one big server, one big service. We can see their effects on the systems that they're running on much better, and we've already identified a large number of changes that need to be made. Some optimizations, some redesigns that will come up later as we're working through the agenda. We also moved the authors and chairs wikis that had previously moved into Amazon into DigitalOcean. I think that may have happened earlier today or late yesterday, but very recently. So we had planned to move the entire mail processing chain at the end of June. We got to the end of June and the system was not ready for us to make that cutover. So we are changing to a model where we are finishing the development of the transitional phase of moving the mail system as it is implemented into IETF into the cloud with a minor set of adjustments, basically splitting Mailman off into its own service. We'll be transitioning after we get the initial testing of this in place, we'll be transitioning the non-meeting affecting lists across, starting with the test lists to prove that the transmission works. And as soon as we have those working, we will move other non-meeting affecting lists before the meeting, and then have everything else shift across just after the 120 meeting ends. As everyone saw, there was quite a bit of discussion as the move of the mail processing system didn't take place, noting the initial lack of support of IPv6 in that mail processing system's ability to send. It can receive over IPv6. Jay responded with a good summary of our intent. We always plan to build to as much support of IPv6 as we can. We will incrementally move towards having IPv6 support for any system that we can add it to, that our initial step is necessarily taking us to a place that doesn't have that support. Before I move into details on the next few things, does anybody have any questions or comments about the main progress on the infrastructure transition project? Not hearing anything.
While people are thinking, Robert, a couple of things. I wonder if you could give us a brief explanation of why we are favoring DigitalOcean now over AWS, and what tools we have decided to stop using as part of that transition.
Sure, and I see a note in a chat about moving mail from Cloudflare to DigitalOcean. Miriam, mail never did go through Cloudflare. So as opposed to some things moving from AWS into DigitalOcean, the complexity in AWS is very high. It's driven by a market that looks like Amazon itself, large e-commerce providers, very large enterprises that have separated things into many small services, and the amount of infrastructure managing overhead to get a simple service running inside of AWS is incredibly large compared to what we have been able to do in other services, Azure and DigitalOcean in particular. We've made the shift to move out of AWS into these for the lower costs of constructing things and better control over the costs of operating things. As we were making these transitions, we also greatly simplified the mechanics that we were using to do deploys, moving from something that was based primarily on Helm to something that was based primarily on Customize, spelled with a K. This has turned out to greatly accelerate our ability to get the services deployed into these environments. We currently, after struggling for several months with getting to the point where we had a quick way to deploy into staging, deploy into production inside AWS, we made this shift of direction, and within a very small number of weeks, it was, we were finished in 6 weeks, but we were well along the way in 3 weeks. Having CI/CD deployments directly from our repositories into staging in one service, currently into Azure, and production in another, DigitalOcean. So we've got, just as part of our normal workflow now, a proof that we are not locking ourselves into either one of these cloud providers unintentionally, so that we know that we can, if needed, shift our production systems from one into the other. So, Jay, were there any points that you wanted me to touch that I haven't touched yet?
No, that's great. Thank you.
So when I read your email, Jay, and thank you for being honest and direct on this one. It looks like for the IPv6 email, as you can guess from my topic, right? We have no timeline. We are waiting for AWS there, right? So they are leading.
Eric, you're breaking up very, very badly.
Yeah, there is a storm here. Could be, I will shut down. Maybe without video, this could be better.
So far, yes.
Big storm here. So that's a little bit annoying. Sorry. So Jay, thank you for being direct and honest in your email of 2nd of July. It looks like the blocking or the gating factor for IPv6 email outbound is AWS, so outside of our control, correct?
I'll answer for the moment, yes.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think Robert has explained just a minute ago, though, that we are, this isn't, the only, that this isn't a fixed, unchangeable decision, but this is where we need to go to now, certainly. And over time, we can review and revise certain aspects of this. That's not a promise that we will change things, but can look at things later.
I hope it's a promise to change things. I hope that in 10 years, email from IETF will be over IPv6, right? I don't say not a promise with a timeline, but a promise on the end destination. Please, Jay.
Yes, I understand. I understand. If that's 10 years is fine, yes. The other thing I think I wanted to do
anyway,
is give... sorry, Eric, go ahead.
No, I think it's useless to talk about it anymore, right? So it's there. I mean, I will go over it. That's no problem. We can go to the next topic.
Thank you. Well, I think we should also take the opportunity to give Mark from Sirius a chance to tell us a little bit more about the work Sirius have been doing and where how that's gone for them over the last month and things.
Thank you, Jay. I'd be very happy to do that. So the first thing, the reason we didn't go live with the mail and the mailing list infrastructure at the end of last month was simply caution. From our experience in moving to Mailman 3 on the in-place server, we thought extreme caution this time would be called for. We didn't, rightly or wrongly, anticipate some of the challenges we had in the end of it. And we didn't want the same thing, given the criticality of the systems. It was a very narrow thing. We pulled out of it at the last minute, but I think it was the correct decision. The position that we are at now is that all of the cloud systems are set up and configured and theoretically, if you like, working in the way they should be. This week is set aside for testing the system. My understanding is that beginning tomorrow, we are going to be testing or prepping the test, and I believe including Ryan and perhaps some other people from the call here, for extracting the mailman data to IETF apps. Assuming that goes ahead, and we are assuming that goes ahead well, that is the part of the system that we're most confident with, given our experience in the last month or so with the in-place migration. Once we got the apps testing done, we're moving on to the final system testing. So we're going to be trialing the post admin traffic, also simulating individual postings via the MX to the outside world and to mailman. So the position we're at is the system is in place. It seems to be functioning as we'd expect it to. And over the next week, we're going to be doing the testing of it. Then we've got to pause, and we should be going live by the end of the month. May I address the IPv6 comments as well? I need to confirm with my engineering team, but I believe that we have solved those issues on AWS. So I don't wish to leave a hostage to fortune, but we should be good with that.
I don't think so, Mark.
Mark, my understanding is you've got IPv6 available on the hosts, on the MX host and on the mailman host, and they can receive email over IPv6. But we don't yet have a solution for sending email over IPv6, at least not for SES.
Thank you for clarifying, Robert and Jay.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And Miria, did you want to ask your question that you put in the chat?
I was just quickly jumping on going live end of the month. I assume that then after the IETF meeting.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yes. Okay, thanks, Robert. Those are the things I just want to make sure we covered in that section.
Sure. So I mentioned earlier, separating the services has given us greater insight into the behavior of the applications. It's allowed us to see in the data tracker that the PDFization of internet drafts, more internet drafts than RFCs, is consuming well more than 10%, somewhere between 10 and 15% of all of what the data tracker is doing. And in some cases, there are edges that we have started to protect against. Calls into the PDFization routines on some submitted drafts never return, causing the worker that is handling the request that asked for that PDFized draft to be killed, causing a brief reduction in performance of the data tracker while a new worker is spun up to replace it. So we started a conversation about the whether or not we should continue PDFizing documents at all. That conversation is still playing out on IETF. Sorry, on Tools Discuss. It is cross-posted with working group chairs heavily at the moment. If it continues much further, we'll try to focus it back into one place. There is some mixed opinion that I'm seeing on the list so far about whether or not we should continue to provide PDFized documents. But we'll see. We'll let that conversation continue to play out. I'm going to jump ahead and note that part of what we've done to mitigate the effect that generating these has on everyone else trying to do other things with the data tracker is we've added quite a bit of rate limiting to how frequently a single requester can request different PDFized documents. This is primarily in place to slow down the heavy robot crawlers that hit these endpoints.
So Robert, now that we're in the cloud, I had a little bit of a question. I understand the need to mitigate attacks that are exploiting the kind of the PDF and potentially the crawler. But if my economics on like a cloud-based model here is, if this is taking up 10 to 15% of the load on the data tracker, what's the cost of moving up to the next size CPU or elastically scaling a little bit that it's not taking that versus, retooling to potentially do that? Because, if it's another 20, 30, I don't know, $100, $200 per month per day versus the dev time, kind of like what's the thinking on the breakpoint? Do we understand that enough?
I don't think we have a solid understanding of whether we could just throw a larger resource at it and have it mitigate the problem completely. My instinct, without having done the work, is that it won't. That we do actually need a redesign. At the very least, we need to get the computation of the PDF bits out of the HTTP processing path, and we're close to having finished that already. So currently, in the existing implementation, the HTTP request pins while that PDF is being built, if it hasn't been built already. It's also a model where these things aren't built until they're requested, and we're doing the math to determine whether pre-computation of these things makes sense, or following Karsten's suggestion, at least having the recent documents pre-computed by computing them at the time that they're submitted might be a way to move the cost into places that don't affect the rest of the users as severely. So just attempting to scale elastically or to apply a slightly higher tier of compute is not going to address the issue of the places where we end up with these computations not returning. That's going to require work to protect ourselves against bad input causing bad outcome. And the last comment, and this is currently where we are in DigitalOcean, we've applied the best CPU that we can apply already. So we have some options if we were to shift where things were to get a higher, a more powerful CPU just for what happens with a single thread, a single process on that CPU into Azure, for example. This is important because just applying more CPUs, more cores won't help with the time that the computation of one of these sets of bits is taking. So,
thanks.
While others are thinking about this, there's one other thing about this that we have been discussing for a while. The tools team are increasingly getting a chance to see data. Sorry, Warren, did you want to jump in before I go off on something separate?
I don't know. I joined the queue, then I left, then I joined the queue again. Maybe Robert.
Don't queue, just jump in. Don't queue.
Maybe you just covered this, but what I'm not quite understanding is why we're not just computing the PDFs at submission time / at midnight on a Thursday and just generating them and caching them. I think that what you said is that's the plan. That's what we're working towards, but I apologize. I missed
one of the suggested alternate ways of doing this for calculating PDFs at submission time if the conversation concludes that we should compute the PDFs at all, right? At least for recent submissions, and maybe only for recent submissions that provide the XML. All right.
Okay.
Because we can't compute the XML to RFC style PDFs, XML to RFC v3 style PDFs for things that are 5 years old and older, right?
Yeah. But I mean, that applies at serving time as well. I think I was just sort of missing the why we would ever compute stuff at serving time, not at submission time. But anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to open the rat hole.
Yeah, no, it's useful to know how we got here. The original implementation of building these PDFs was well, here's a thing that makes PDF. Why don't we make some PDFs and see how it works? Oh, this is going to change a lot over time. Let's just compute it into a cache that expires so that when the PDF thing changes over time, it naturally refreshes after it falls out of cache and gets recomputed with whatever the new computation looks like. And it has turned out that this introduced a heavier load on the entire system than was originally anticipated.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. So going back to the point I was talking about earlier, we increasingly the tools team are getting access to lots of interesting and useful data. As Robert just mentioned, having all of these services now split out and instrumented provides a wealth of data about how they're operating. In a traditional organization, of course, that will be just kept within the tools team, but this is an organization where transparency is its superpower. And it is, I think, to our advantage if that information can be shared and made available to people within the community. But of course, it's not something that can just be openly made available within the community. There has to be some level of trust and gatekeeping. And it's not just about performance data. This is a general thing about data that is collected there. We have had some discussions internally about that, but haven't yet had a come to any conclusion about that. And I think I've mentioned it to this group once before. But if anybody gets to the stage where they think they have an idea, or they think that they would have some good reasons to look at that data, or don't even need a good reason, that we could trust you looking at that data, then please come forward about that. I would like to get to a stage personally, I think, where some of this data is open and transparent and people can access that, because that's the nature of the organization we are.
All right. Well, to reinforce what Jay said, we do have a lot of insight into how the servers are behaving. We're primarily looking at things using the Grafana universe at this point. So we have ingesters into many of the Grafana universe databases, and Grafana itself as a way to see it. And if anyone in the community here wants access to that, all you need to do is ask us. Unless anybody has any questions, Jay, if you wanted to talk about the privacy statement.
So many of you may not have seen this if you haven't read IETF announce in the last half an hour. There has been a long-standing error in the privacy statement stating that we don't use browser storage, when actually the HTML5 web storage API has been in use from a number of systems using local storage and session storage. And so the privacy statement has now been corrected to correctly reflect that. And I just want to talk about this verbally to give anybody a chance to ask a question about this if they have any concerns or otherwise about it. Great, thanks.
All right. So the rest of these sections are intended to be taken as read. And take a few minutes to give people that might not have had a chance to skim through them and raise any questions. We're happy to talk about them, but we're not going to read through them in detail as we're going through the remainder of the meeting. Does anyone have any questions about any of the other services, topics that haven't been brought up, or any other topics that they'd like to discuss while we're together today? The code sprint is happening immediately before the IETF 120 meeting. Hope to see as many of you there as can make it. If we don't see you at the code sprint, hope to see you during the meeting. Thanks everyone again for taking the time to join and discuss things today.
Thank you, Robert.
And we'll see you all in a couple of weeks.